My parents scoffed and said, "Be honest. When are you going to be someone like your brother?" While they paid for his $60,000 wedding. I stayed quiet, built a $91 million software company in secret, and now they keep calling because family should stick together. That question, that single careless phrase, didn't sound like a question at all. It sounded like an obituary for my future, delivered over the sizzling sound of cheap ground beef burgers at a humid 4th of July barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of lighter fluid, char, and my mother's overpowering perfume. I was 27 then, standing by the grill, trying to look busy, trying to look functional. If you had asked me 10 years earlier what I wanted to be, I would have answered with a shrug. I was just Stephen, the quiet, observant one. The kid who liked taking things apart. Not to build something new, but just to see how the gears meshed. I was the quirky one, the weird one. The one who just needed to figure it out. Meanwhile, my brother, Evan, was the blueprint. He was 4 years older, the golden child, illuminated by a spotlight my parents carried with them everywhere. He was class president, captain of the football team, and later, the one with the real job. He majored in finance, wore suits even to casual dinners, and had a story ready that made everyone laugh. My mom treated him like a saint, the second coming of a tech titan, a genius whose very existence was a source of pride. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I was erased. Growing up, my home felt like a museum dedicated to Evan's achievements. His school portraits hung in the hallway. Mine were usually stuffed into a box of old tax records, or cropped, weirdly, because a cousin had her eyes closed in the shot. It was death by 1,000 dismissals. When I got an A+ in college physics, Dad would clap me on the shoulder and say, "Don't worry, Stephen. Not everyone's gifted." When Evan got a B+ in an optional seminar, it was, "Wow. That professor must be brutal." I remember the feeling of trying to keep up, of hoping some measurable success would finally earn me a space on the wall. I joined the robotics club. Mom told me, "That's cute, sweetie. Just don't let it interfere with real responsibilities." I landed a serious summer internship coding back-end systems. Dad shrugged, asking, "So, like IT support?" It all culminated that day at the grill. I had just started a passion project, a software as a service tool meant to streamline virtual onboarding. It was niche, yes, but I believed in it. I mentioned it casually while turning the burgers, trying to gauge their reaction. My mother looked at me, a genuine, pitying laugh escaping her lips. "Stephen," she said, her voice carrying across the picnic table toward my aunts and uncles. "Be honest. When are you going to be someone like your brother?" The smoke didn't make my eyes water. It was just the sudden, cold realization that nothing I could ever do, no grade, no code, no company, would shift the narrative. I would always be the side character in my own family story. Evan was paying for $70 haircuts and buying tailored suits while I was teaching myself every programming language I could find, blurring my vision over a cheap laptop. They were talking about his box seats to the Knicks game, his fiancée from Good People, and his vice president title. I was still figuring things out. A few months later came the intervention. They sat me down in the living room. Dad folded his hands in that serious way. Mom leaned forward, ready to deliver tragic news. Evan sat smugly on the armrest, nursing a beer. "We've been talking," Dad said, "about your future. You're not failing, Stephen." Mom chimed in. "We just think it's time you consider something stable." Stable. That word grated me. They meant a low ceiling, a small box where I could stop dreaming. Something like what Evan was doing, she gently suggested. I smiled, nodded, and said I'd think about it. But something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger. It was colder, a quiet, strategic resolve. It was the whisper that said, "Watch me." From that day forward, I stopped trying to prove anything to them. I let them believe I was muddling through freelance gigs, barely scraping by. I accepted the role of the quiet screw up. But behind the scenes, I stopped seeking their love and started building something undeniable. I let them pay the $60,000 bill for Evan's lavish wedding. While I missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and dodged their calls. Every hour they thought I was finding myself, I was building a highway to change my life. The quiet resolve I found after their intervention became the core of my existence for the next 4 years. I didn't join a monastery. I just chose to live in one. My apartment was cheap, the walls were thin, and the furniture was second-hand. It was the perfect ecosystem for a self-imposed isolation. I called this period my monastic build. I stopped telling them anything. I let them assume I was still muddling through, barely scraping by on inconsistent freelance pay. Every time they asked, I'd offer a vague, non-committal answer, a verbal shrug that satisfied their preconceptions and kept them off my back. But behind the closed door of that miserable apartment, I worked. The company Uxin started small. It was just Mira and me, 2 laptops running hot in 2 different time zones. Mira was my co-founder, a pragmatic hyper-focused engineer who didn't care about pedigree or family narratives. She cared about clean code and solving real problems. She became my anchor. I poured every ounce of the energy I had previously wasted seeking my parents' approval into Oxen. The pain of my emotional erasure was channeled into a focused, grinding obsession. I lived on ramen, cheap black coffee, and adrenaline. I missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and ignored the occasional just checking in voicemail from mom. I told myself I was too busy, and I was. But the truth was, I didn't trust myself not to explode. If I had to listen to one more patronizing comment. Every hour they believed I was failing to find my path. I was building it. The finance Evan majored in couldn't calculate the return on that kind of focused suffering. Evan, meanwhile, was living the script. He got the tailored suits, the promotion to vice president of client relations, and the fiancée Claire, who came from, as mom liked to put it, good people. Their life was loud, public, and expensive. And the centerpiece of their narrative was the wedding. My parents decided to foot the entire bill. $60,000. I overheard mom mention the figure once to an aunt, treating it like it was pocket change. Well, we have to, she had explained, completely oblivious to the person listening. Evan's our firstborn. He's done everything right. That line, Evan's done everything right, echoed in my tiny apartment for weeks. I had launched the beta version of Oxen 2 months prior, and we had already hit a valuation that dwarfed the cost of his reception. But sure, Evan had done everything right. I hadn't studied business. I had studied problems, and I was solving one very well. But that required understanding, which required seeing me, and that was something they were physically incapable of doing. That profound knowledge settled over me like a heavy shroud, preparing me for the performance I knew Evan's wedding would be. The final insult wasn't the wedding itself, it was the invitation. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't an invitation at all. It was a massive group text, a digital cattle call sent to the entire extended family, cousins, uncles, great aunts, all in one buzzing thread. I was tagged as an afterthought, beneath a sea of champagne emojis and excessive exclamation points. The message was generic. Let us know if you can make it, Steven. No personal call. No thoughtful note. Just another notification in a group chat, confirming that my presence was entirely optional and forgettable. I stared at that message for a long time. Did I want to go? No. But part of me, the wounded part that still craved acknowledgement, needed to see it. I needed the final, undeniable confirmation that I was still a footnote in Evan's magnificent main story. I bought a basic, off-the-rack black suit. I didn't bring a date. I drove my modest Toyota, the car that ran fine. Thank you very much, and showed up without fanfare. I was dressed to blend in, to serve as a noticeable contrast to Evan's custom-made navy tuxedo. I sat at a table near the emergency exit, right next to the towering speaker stack. I watched my parents beam during the father-son dance. Mom wiped tears. Dad gripped Evan's shoulder like he was passing down the kingdom's crown. Their toast was a monologue of adoration. You've always been the light of our lives. I clinked glasses with a confused waiter who probably. I was part of the catering staff. The speeches were excruciating. Mom stood up, glass of champagne in hand, her voice trembling with joy. Some parents are lucky if one of their children finds success, she said. But us, we hit the jackpot with Evan. She paused for dramatic effect. From the moment he was born, we knew he was destined for something great. Then she glanced toward my corner of the room, near the fire extinguisher, and offered a polite, strained smile. But Steven's here too, she said, an absolute afterthought. He's finding his way, and that's okay. The room laughed politely. I didn't. I just kept my eyes fixed on the tablecloth, feeling the profound, heavy confirmation that the distance I had put between myself and them was not nearly far enough. I was still disposable. I left before the dessert was served, slipping out during a particularly loud rendition of Sweet Caroline. Feeling like a ghost exiting a party he was never invited to, in the first place. I didn't say goodbye, and I didn't look back. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a psychological turning point. I drove away that night knowing, not just guessing, that my family's reality was fixed. I was the supporting actor, and Evan was the star, a hierarchy immutable by anything short of a disaster. I was done chasing the ghost of their approval. 7 months later, I had my chance to test my new detachment. It was Thanksgiving. I hadn't planned to go. Truly. But a foolish, wounded part of me still wondered if time, and my quiet success, might have changed the dynamics. I didn't go to show off. I just wanted to be seen, finally, without effort. It was a mistake. Dinner was at my parents' house, and nothing had changed. The same peeling wallpaper. The same centerpiece my mom had bought 6 years ago, and insisted was rustic charm. Eva and Claire arrived 20 minutes late, fashionably, of course. Mom greeted them like they'd flown in from Paris on their private jet. I got a literal nod. The food was fine. The turkey dry. The potatoes lumpy. But the tension was immaculate. Every time I tried to speak, someone cut me off. Every time Evan opened his mouth, the room turned to listen like he was reciting ancient prophecy. He told some long, dull story about a golf game with his boss. And Mom actually clapped. Then Dad launched into a tale about Evan's new financial management initiative, which I suspected was just a new spreadsheet template at work. I mumbled, "That's great," and retreated into my dry turkey. The real blow came after dessert. We were sitting in the living room, half the family asleep in armchairs, the football game humming quietly on the television. Claire was showing off photos of their recent honeymoon. Italy, of course. When Evan turned to me, completely casually like we were old friends. So, what have you been up to, little bro? I blinked. Working. He raised an eyebrow, dripping with fox concern. Still freelancing. Something like that. I said, keeping my tone flat. Something like that. My mom cut in from across the room, smiling kindly. He's doing little app things, I think. Aren't you, honey? I stared at her. I run a software company. She laughed. That laugh. The same one from the barbecue, but softer, more patronizing. Oh, Stephen, you always make it sound so fancy. It's real, I said, feeling the heat rise in my collar. I wasn't trying to fight. I was trying to tell the truth. We just hit our first major milestone. My dad looked up from the television remote. Milestone. I shrugged, trying to sound indifferent, trying to minimize the size of the truth so they might accept it. A $91 million valuation. The room went completely silent. Claire paused mid-scroll on her phone. Evan's smugness was wiped clean off his face, replaced by a sudden, ugly suspicion. What? He demanded. We closed our Series B 2 weeks ago, I said. Raised a good chunk. We are expanding globally now. Mom blinked rapidly. Stephen, that's not possible. You never even studied business. I studied problems, I said, meeting her eyes. Then I solved one. That's how companies start. I just wanted one moment. One single moment where I could say something real, and not have it reduced to a joke. Not have it shrugged off like I was still that awkward teenager. But that moment never came. Instead of pride, I got suspicion. Dad leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. So, you're saying you're a millionaire? I'm saying the company is doing well, I corrected. Evan scoffed. And yet you drove here in a Toyota. It runs fine. You expect us to believe this? Mom asked, her voice sharp now, laced with betrayal. Stephen, this isn't funny. It's not a joke, I stated. I built something from scratch. I didn't tell anyone because, well, because of exactly this. You always had a habit of exaggerating. Dad muttered, dismissing the entire concept. And just like that, the conversation ended. They didn't ask questions. They didn't ask how I did it, what the product was, or what it meant to me. They changed the subject. Someone made a joke about the turkey being dry, and the room laughed, and my $91 million truth was buried beneath gravy and deflection. I left early again, the silence of my departure different this time. It wasn't peaceful. It was cold, strategic, and hollow. The great reveal, the one I thought would be my final victory, only confirmed the depth of the illusion they were determined to maintain. They didn't see me as a person. They only saw the comfortable reality they wanted. And I realized that the value of my work was not in its potential to earn their respect, but in its potential to build a boundary that could finally protect me from them. The silence that followed Thanksgiving was not peaceful. It was strategic. For a time, I thought that burying my truth under gravy and deflection would be the end of it. It wasn't. Because even when I went quiet, they didn't. The call started small. Mom left a voicemail asking if I could help Evan with some technical stuff. She referred to me, the founder of a $91 million software company, as the family IT guy. Her exact words were, the computer things. He's having trouble syncing some files on that cloud thing. I didn't respond. I wouldn't be reduced to a tool. Then Evan emailed me. The subject line was blank. The body was just the word, whoa. No, hey, no, how are you? Just the assumption of instant availability and obligation. Claire's laptop is stuck on some update screen. Can you look at it? No, please. No offer to pay. Just the expectation that my time was free. My skills were for their service, and my life was flexible. I blocked his email address without replying. The escalation didn't stop there. The request transitioned from labor to capital. A few weeks later, I got the text from Evan. No greeting again. Just the demand. Yo, you got like 10,000 I can borrow. Claire and I are looking at a house. I didn't reply. He sent another the next day. You there? Just alone. Parents said you're doing well now. That made me freeze. They told him. I hadn't realized how fast the news, or at least the possibility of my success, would spread once they accepted it. I wasn't a son to be proud of, I was a resource. A walking ATM with quiet boundaries they felt entitled to breach. Then came Evan's Instagram post. He and Claire stood in front of a new house, grinning widely. The caption read, "Started from the bottom. Now we here." My blood ran cold because I recognized the house. It was one I had toured myself a few months back, when I was contemplating upgrading my monastic apartment. A brief therapeutic foray into normal life. The agent had said it was sold. Full cash offer. A small, foolish part of me hoped it was a coincidence. Until the second photo, Claire's wrist, adorned with a new Rolex. It was the same model I had purchased for myself the week after our Series B closed. An almost $16,000 victory watch that I hadn't even worn yet. I scrolled through the photos, my stomach tightening. New luxury car, fully renovated kitchen, designer furniture. It added up to way more than Evan's mid-level finance job could possibly justify. My fingers were numb as I checked my private wallets. I used them for transferring investment gains, separate from my main business accounts. The transactions were small enough not to trigger a flag, unless you were tracking them closely. One withdrawal. $3,000. Transferred out 2 weeks before Evan's house announcement. Another transaction, $5,000. A different wallet. The same week. Then one more. $4,000. Different date, different platform. And all of them connected to the same secondary email address, a generic Gmail handle I had seen years ago on a shared family Netflix account. Evan. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. He hadn't asked me for money. He had taken it. And the presumption, the absolute arrogance that he could steal from me, and I wouldn't notice, that he deserved it more than I did, was the final, devastating act of erasure. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was theft. The line had been crossed. I called my parents. My voice was flat and measured, emptied of all emotion. "I think Evan's been in my accounts," I said. "I found several transfers. They're traceable. They link back to an old email he used." Silence. Then, Dad's voice, rough with immediate defensiveness. "Are you sure you didn't just make those transfers and forget?" "Stephen." I almost laughed. "You think I misplaced $12,000? The total from those transactions?" Mom jumped in. "Maybe it was a business expense. You said before, you use lots of apps and tools. Maybe one billed you." "I check everything," I stated. "And even if I didn't, it wouldn't link to Evan's personal email." More silence. Heavy, damning silence. Finally, Mom spoke, her tone switching from concern to quiet, desperate refusal. "Stephen, honey, Evan wouldn't do that. He's not a thief." I was quiet for a long time. The pain didn't make a sound, it just settled in my bones. "And if he did?" I asked. "What then?" She didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Because acknowledging Evan's guilt would shatter the entire golden child narrative they had built. They couldn't afford that, not even for me. I hung up. I realized with crystalline clarity that I had no family, not in the way that mattered. They were not gatekeepers of love, they were enablers of entitlement. I was a tool, a walking ATM with a quiet voice and no boundaries. That night, I opened a private document. Not to write notes. To write blueprints. Because if they wanted a villain, I would be one. A quiet, smiling one who burned everything down strategically. The realization that I had been violated, first emotionally, then financially, didn't lead to a fiery explosion. It led to a cold, surgical calculation. I realized I couldn't win the battle for their love, but I could certainly win the war for the truth. My first call was to a lawyer named Talia. She was sharp, pragmatic, and didn't waste time on emotion. I walked into her office with a file containing the transfer logs, screenshots, and old emails. I wanted proof, an undeniable record. I don't want to press charges, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want? I want something they can't spin, I said. Something they see every time they try to lie about it. Talia helped me draft a letter. It wasn't a cease and desist. It wasn't a demand for immediate repayment. It was a formal acknowledgement, a precise document that laid out the facts. Slept. Named Evan, stated that the matter was documented, and confirmed that legal action would not be pursued for now. We mailed it to Evan's address, certified. Signature required. 3 days later, I got the delivery confirmation. 10 minutes after that, my phone started ringing. Mom, Dad, Claire, and Evan. I let it ring. I poured myself a drink and watched the city lights blink. They knew. Finally, they knew that I knew. After weeks of ignoring the panic calls, I finally replied to Evan's frantic text message. Let's talk? I wrote. No emojis, no context. He answered in seconds. Dude, yes. When and where? I suggested a bar downtown. Not too fancy, but upscale enough that he would feel comfortable wearing the new Rolex. The one he had bought with my money. I arrived 15 minutes early and secured a booth in the back. Evan showed up late, of course. He still had the confident walk, the smug half-smile plastered on his face, but the tension was bleeding through his shirt collar. He slid into the booth and gave me a forced grin. Man, this is, yeah, been a while, huh? It has? I agreed. The silence that followed was heavy with his guilt. He leaned in, lowering his voice, instantly adopting the posture of a conspirator. Look, about the letter. You got it. Yeah, I got it. I just didn't mean to steal anything. Bro. Seriously. I thought it was an old account. I just needed a little cash and saw it still had money in it. I didn't think it would matter. You didn't think stealing would matter. I didn't know it was stealing at the time, I swear. He said, rubbing his hands together. I was desperate. Claire was pressuring me. We were trying to get a place before the market jumped again. And Mom said you were doing well. So I figured. He figured I'd be fine with it. He figured I wouldn't notice. He figured I wouldn't matter. I didn't come here for an apology. I interrupted. He looked confused. Then why are we here? To give you a choice. That got his full attention. He straightened up, the panic tightening his face. A choice. You repay me with interest. Quietly. No drama. No excuses. Over time. Or I escalate. I raised my hand before he could protest. And before you try to bluff, I have everything. Logs, emails, IP addresses, timestamps, and a lawyer who's very good at making noise. He stared at me for a long moment, the gears turning. He wasn't sorry, he was simply cornered. Finally, he exhaled. Okay, fine. I'll do it. Good, I nodded. But, he added quickly, desperately, don't tell Mom and Dad, all right? They'll freak. It'll tear the family apart. I chuckled, a small, cold sound. I'm not the one who tore it apart. Evan. I left in with the written repayment plan. Monthly transfers. Amounts just high enough to sting, to serve as a constant, Grinding reminder. He signed it without reading it carefully. Typical. That was just step one. Now that I had him silent, cooperating, and nervous, I could move to rewriting the legacy. For years, every family event had been about him. I was background noise. To change the dynamic, I needed to become undeniable in their world, on their turf. I started small. I sent my parents a gift, a framed newspaper article from a local business journal. It featured a photo of me, my face finally public, and a headline: "The quiet tech founder changing how teams work globally." Below that, the editor's note detailing Oxen Software's $91 million valuation after closing its Series B. I didn't include a note. The facts spoke for themselves. A week later, Mom texted, "Got your gift. Didn't know you were in the news." That's impressive. Impressive from her. That was an entire monologue. Then came the dinner invitation. Not a group thing. Just me, Mom, and Dad. We'd love to catch up. Just the three of us. I accepted. I showed up 15 minutes early. I chose the restaurant. A quiet, expensive Italian place that was tasteful but not flashy. I wore a simple, tailored suit. No Rolex, just confidence. When they arrived, they were flustered. Mom hugged me awkwardly. Dad offered a handshake. They made nervous small talk about traffic and a cousin's baby. Then came the inevitable question. "So, your company?" Dad said, clearing his throat. "Tell us more. We didn't realize it was doing so well." I smiled politely. "It's been a good few years. A lot of hard work. I just wish you'd told us sooner." Mom added, "We felt left out." I paused, holding her gaze. "I didn't think you were interested." She blinked. "Of course we were, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "Last Thanksgiving, you said I was finding my way. After I told you about the business." I tilted my head. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just being honest. For a long time, it felt like you only saw what Evan did right, and what I did wrong." Dad shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't argue. They just sat with the truth. And for once the silence was thoughtful, not dismissive. This dinner wasn't about guilt. It was about establishing new rules. I didn't mention Evan. This was solely about drawing the boundary of my own worth. I made it clear I was doing well. I was happy. And I was no longer the kid who needed their approval. That landed hard. After the dinner, the narrative began to shift. I started attending family events again. Not all of them, but just enough to be visible, to remind them that I wasn't hiding anymore. And when people asked what I was doing, I told them without shrinking, without apologizing. Slowly, I began to shift from Evan's brother, the one who built that software company. It helped that Oakson was everywhere now: startups, HR blogs, even a sponsored segment on a national podcast. My name was out there, my face, my story. My parents started bragging about me. The same people who once scoffed now boasted to their neighbors that I led a global team. They didn't fully understand what I did, but they knew it mattered. But that wasn't the end goal. That was just groundwork. Because now that the surface narrative had shifted, it was time for the final, necessary reveal. I had Evan pinned with the monthly repayments, which, predictably, had become erratic. He had missed 2 installments in the last 3 months, without explanation. The leash was tight, and I knew he was sweating. I waited for the perfect opportunity. It arrived gift wrapped. My cousin, Daniel's wedding. It was a big event, held at a beautiful vineyard, the kind of place where everyone showed up dressed like it was the Oscars. I knew Evan would be there in full peacock mode. Tailored navy tuxedo, hair styled to perfection, Claire on his arm, in a designer gown. He spotted me before I even stepped onto the gravel path. "Steven," He called out, his voice dripping with forced warmth, arms open like we were long, lost siblings in a holiday movie. Didn't think I'd see you here. I smiled and gave him a polite nod. Family event. Wouldn't miss it. I saw the flicker of nervousness behind his eyes. He knew exactly what he owed me. I didn't remind him. I didn't have to. I wasn't here for social hour. I was here for the final act. What Evan didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I hadn't come alone. Across the room, at a table near the floral arch, sat a woman in her late 30s, Lydia. She was a forensic accountant, the best I could afford. After Evan missed that second repayment, I decided to dig deeper, not just into him, but into the entire web he had woven. If he had no shame stealing from me directly, what else had he been getting into? The answer was worse than I imagined. Evan had been managing the family trust, a modest fund left by my grandfather, meant to cover things like education, emergencies, and long-term care for extended relatives. This fund was sacred. It had helped my Aunt Marlene during her cancer treatment and paid for another cousin's grad school. Evan had been systematically draining it. Small transfers, fake invoices, and fraudulent reimbursements. With no receipts. Lydia traced every dollar. Over $78,000 gone. All routed to accounts linked to Evan or Claire. He had no idea anyone was even looking at the trust. I waited until after the cake cutting, after the champagne toasts, and after the dance floor was packed with relatives swaying awkwardly. That was when I made my move. I approached Evan near the bar. "Can I borrow you for a second?" He raised an eyebrow but followed. I led him to the side patio, where string lights cast warm glows across the empty tables. The music thumped quietly behind us. "What's up?" he asked, already guarded. I handed him a manila folder. He frowned, opened it, and began to read. Page after page, every transfer, every account, every timestamp. Lydia's cover letter summarized her findings: misappropriation of funds from the Azriel Family Intergenerational Trust. His face went instantly pale. "Stephen," he stammered, his voice small. This is ridiculous. This is taken out of context." I stepped closer, my voice even. "You didn't just steal from me, Evan. You stole from the family. From Aunt Marlene, from Danielle's college fund, from Grandpa's legacy." I can explain." "No," I said sharply. "You won't, because you won't have the chance." He looked at me, panicked. "What does that mean?" I handed him a second folder. Inside was a prepared statement of resignation from his position managing the trust, a formal letter admitting financial misconduct. It was the kind of document that wouldn't put him in jail, but would destroy any goodwill he had left with the family. He shook his head, trembling. "You wouldn't." I tilted mine. "I already have." His eyes widened. And that's when I stepped aside and gestured toward the door behind me. It opened. Lydia stepped out, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were Aunt Marlene, Danielle's mom, and my cousin Jonah, the one Evan had mocked years ago for choosing teaching over finance. They had heard everything. Evan staggered back. Face red, words failing him. "No," he muttered. "No, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. You don't get to explain," Marlene said, her voice cold and steady. "You get to listen. We didn't yell. We didn't insult him. We laid out the facts, calm, surgical, and devastating. Then, Lydia handed him the final document, a restitution agreement. Every cent he took from the trust, he would pay back, or face legal action. Evan's knees buckled slightly as he sank onto the edge of a planter. He knew he was finished. The golden child had just been exposed as the thief of the family's most sacred resource. I walked away from the patio before Evan had finished signing the final restitution document. There was nothing more to see. I didn't need to witness the collapse. I only needed to ensure the facts were established. I drove home, not with a feeling of triumph, but with an exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. I heard the fallout was dramatic. Claire left the wedding early, allegedly in tears. Before the main course was served, rumors spread like wildfire through the family. By the next morning, half of the relatives knew Evan was not just a failure, but a thief. By the end of the week, he had been quietly disinvited from my parents' upcoming anniversary party, removed from 3 family group chats, and blocked by several cousins on social media. The golden child narrative had been publicly and irrevocably shattered. As for my parents, the call started immediately. I ignored the first few, letting the silence convey the severity of the damage. When I finally answered, it was my mother. Her voice was raw, stripped of its usual performative cheer. "Stephen," she said, her voice shaking, "what happened at the wedding? Is it true?" "All of it." "Yes," I replied, simply. "All of it." A silence fell, longer and heavier than any I had experienced before. It was the sound of her world collapsing. "Then why didn't you tell us?" She finally managed, the question less an accusation and more a plea for help. "You never listened," I said. My voice was calm, utterly devoid of the rage I had carried for years. "Why would I keep trying?" I heard her start to cry. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't hate her, but I didn't comfort her either. It wasn't my job anymore. I was done managing their comfort or their denial. "We want to fix this," she whispered. "No," I replied gently but firmly. "You need to fix yourselves. I'm doing just fine." She tried again the next day, and my father joined in the following evening. "Your brother needs a hand," Dad insisted. "It's not like he's asking for much. You're in a position to help, and we're asking as your parents." The old, familiar dynamic flared up, seeking to reassert itself. I shut it down completely. "I didn't ask you to pay for my apartment when I was eating ramen every night," I said. "Where was the family then?" "That's different," he snapped. "You chose to be stubborn. Evan's building a life. He was stealing from the family's legacy." I corrected him. "And you abled him, because it was easier than admitting you were wrong about your favorite son. I am done being the backup plan." I hung up, and that was the final cut. They didn't see me as a person. Not really. I was a tool, a resource, a walking ATM with a quiet voice. And now that tool had locked them out and given them an ultimatum: confront your own biases, or lose me completely. For weeks, I moved through life with an emotional flatness. But I was productive. I had burned the last bridge to the past, and I focused on building the future. I found immense relief in the work. I leaned into Mira, who didn't pry or ask why I had gone dark. She just sent me a simple, grounding message. "You good now?" "Getting there," I replied. I realized I hadn't built Oxen just to make money. I had built it because I thought it would finally make me enough. Enough to earn their respect. Enough to be seen. But the confrontation had taught me that no amount of success would ever change their fundamental refusal to look. Now, with the truth out, the why of the business shifted. I stopped working to prove them wrong and started working to build something right. We hired 3 new engineers, brought on a consultant for our Series C. I started taking interviews again, podcasts, tech blogs. For the first time, I let my face be publicly associated with the product. No more hiding. People started messaging me. Old college friends, former co-workers, even a few distant cousins. They weren't asking for money. They were saying things like, "Dude, I had no idea that was you." Or, I've been using Oxen for months. It's brilliant. I let those messages in. I let them replace the toxicity I had been obsessing over. This was my chosen family. Now, the people who saw me, who respected me, who didn't need to compare me to anyone else to know my worth. I started running again. Got a haircut, cleaned my apartment, cooked a real meal. One night, I invited Mira and a few team members over for dinner. We drank cheap wine, made terrible jokes, and talked about the future until 2 in the morning. And in that moment, I realized that the pain, the quiet ache, was still there, but it no longer defined me. I hadn't forgotten what Evan did, or what my parents didn't do. I just knew that the truth was out in the open, not buried under fake smiles. Their version of reality, where Evan was the hero and I was the broken one, was over. I was stronger now. I was free. In the months that followed the wedding and the final, difficult calls, the shift was complete. The chaos subsided, replaced by a deep, strategic calm. Evan kept his head down. The repayments resumed, this time larger and on time, ensuring the leash remained firmly in place. My parents began asking real questions about my work. Not the performative, vague questions of the past, but questions born of genuine curiosity and, perhaps, a belated attempt to understand the life they had previously dismissed. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But I was done chasing their approval. I had found the peace that comes with self-acceptance, a peace far more valuable than any apology they could offer. I had become something they never expected, not just successful, but grounded. A year passed. I decided on a final, quiet act of closure. I made an anonymous donation to a local high school in my grandfather's name. The amount was generous, more than enough to cover the $78,000. Even had siphoned from the family trust, and then some. I specified that the money was to be used to build a new computer lab, a place where quiet, observant kids could tinker, build, and learn the kind of hard skills that led to real, tangible creation. I never told anyone about the donation. Not my parents, not Mira, not even Aunt Marlene. Because some victories don't need applause. Some are better lived in peace. I stood in that newly dedicated computer lab during the small ribbon-cutting ceremony. The air smelled of new paint and circuitry. Kids were already sitting at the sleek desks, their faces illuminated by the screens, playing with programs, building things from scratch. Dreaming bigger I ever had at their age. I was just an observer, a quiet face in the back of the room. And I smiled. They had asked me once, at a barbecue, over cheap, charred meat, "When are you going to be someone like your brother?" The answer, I realized, standing there in the warmth of the new lab, was simple, final, and true: never. Because I became so much more. And finally, I knew it.